Hi and welcome back to another video. Yes, we are actually checking out a Mac GPU in today's video, and that's not because I'm a big fan of Apple, because that's not the case, but because this should be the last ever made consumer dual GPU graphics card. Dual GPU graphics cards were a bigger thing, I would say, from maybe 2005 to 2014, but after that they were pretty much dead. The last made consumer card from NVIDIA side was the Titan Z. That was in 2014, so that's already 9 years ago. That's longer than I expected when I did the research. And the last consumer made card by AMD was the Radeon Pro Duo. That was in 2016. What we have here is the AMD Radeon Pro W6800X Duo. And drawing by the name, you could draw the conclusion that this is a 6800X with dual GPU, and that's pretty much the case. Also, if you look up the specs, it's featuring 3840 shader units, which is the same on an RX 6800. But this comes with, and it will depend how you look at this, but in theory it has 64 GB of memory, GDDR6, which is quite a lot. But then it also depends, are the GPUs working in parallel or are they working together? Because typically one GPU can only access its memory, so one GPU can only access 32 GB of memory. So there has always been a debate. I personally think it should be listed with 32 GB of memory total. And this is for the Mac Pro 2019. I always wanted to check out how this card looks, because you can find some render images online, but I've never seen anyone disassemble this card, and it should look absolutely beautiful. When this was originally listed in 2021 here in Germany, it was listed starting from 5,000, typically around 6,000 euros. I was able to buy this at a cheap 3,500 euro, which I thought is an okay price for me to take a video and then add it to my collection. But let's check out this card in more detail.
This video is powered by Hetzner. If you have a workload that doesn't require 56 cores but still a high performance dedicated root server, you should look into the AX41 NVMe. The Ryzen 5 3600 based server is equipped with dual 512GB NVMe SSDs, 64GB of memory, and costs only €3730 per month. As usual with Hetzner, there's no minimum contract period and you can use unlimited traffic. Find out more on the link below.
One thing that makes this card quite a bit different from our normal consumer GPU is the fact that we have an MPX module. And what this means, we will see once we take it out of the box. And there it is, the 6800X Duo, which just from the first look is a huge black brick. But also a beautiful design. It kind of reminds me of a Founders Edition card from NVIDIA. It's a bit difficult to shoot video footage from it because the autofocus will just go completely nuts with the surface. But like first look, it's just a massive black thing. However, if we flip it around, we can see, it's a very thick one. I mean, nowadays with the 4090, it's probably not such of a surprise, but back then, when it was released, it was definitely bigger than most of the cards out there. We can already spot mounting of one GPU and also of the second GPU right here. And we can see the connectors, which in front is just a normal PCIe X16 interface, but in the back it's this MPX part. And even though it might also look like PCIe, it's a different pin density. So we have more pins on the same length. And in addition, we have this thick one right here, which I would personally assume that it's 12 volt on one side and then ground probably on the other side. That's something we will try to find out, because apart from that, there are no additional power connectors. And this card is pulling up to 400 watt. At least that is the rated TDP. When we look at the cooling, there is a good amount of fins. And there's no fans. Like, we can look all the way through the card. And that's just because that's how the Mac Pro is designed. So you plug it in and then we have some fans on the case that is pulling the air through the card. And that's probably also the case why we have this like rather like wide fin stack. It's not like, it's a lot of surface area, but it's not very fine. And that's, I guess, because they just want to avoid that the fans have to spin at a high RPM to push some air through. If we look at the front, also this part is absolutely beautiful. We have a lot of aluminum. It's probably milled aluminum. Like the front I/O part looks really good. We have one HDMI, and those should probably be the Thunderbolt connectors for display connection. There's one more connector on top of the card, which I think is something like CrossFire or probably just normal CrossFire, because you can theoretically hook up 2 of these cards. So you can run quad GPU. But I'll just try to remove this cover. That's interesting. My initial thought was that this is just a cover, but when I removed it, there was a solid PCB underneath, and you can see there is some kind of circuit. I cannot see any traces, but they could be inside. Yeah, it could just be that this is some kind of like CrossFire bridge to actually connect both of the GPUs. And here we would have the according connectors. What I also find an interesting feature is this lever on top right. So actually, if I pull this, if we look around, can see that this will be to pull the card out of the slot, which is very convenient. And I mean, nowadays we have some mainboards that allow to like remove the small thing at the end of the PCIe slot, but that's a very cool solution. It's time to remove at least part of the cover. When I tried to remove the backplate, like I removed all of the screws, I just noticed that this thing goes basically all around the card. And I guess this is a sticker right here, which we will have to remove. And probably underneath we will find more screws. So Apple style, yeah, repairability and everything is usually great. One tip, if you have some case like this, you can always use a heat gun to try to find screw holes underneath the stickers, because it seems like this sticker is very difficult to remove. Okay, so at least I could remove the I/O cover. That is a beautiful piece of metal. It's CNC milled. Extremely high quality. I really like that. This is definitely more difficult than I expected. It's because the shroud is a bit U-shaped, and even though I removed everything like the lever mechanism and everything, it's still a bit complicated to get it off. Like if I try to remove it, it instantly hits like parts of these caps right here. But because it's a U, like I have no room to take it off. This, yeah. Okay, apparently you indeed have to like bend this a little bit so you can lift this up, but I'm not a friend of that. Okay. At least thermally the cover also makes sense, because you can see all these, I think it's a thermal putty. And it's making contact with all the memory modules. So they at least got that the cover is also, it has a thermal function. At least on this cap you can see some kind of like tiny damage when I tried to like remove the cover. Yeah, it's just an Apple thing that it's very inconvenient to like remove or disassemble anything. So that's not a surprise, but like already the backside is such a beauty. I'm absolutely looking forward to see how this thing looks from the front. Probably one of the more expensive pillows she's using. I removed all remaining screws, and what you can see here are, like unlike on NVIDIA cards, on recent NVIDIA cards, these are not springs. Let's say on a 4090 you have these springs to increase the mounting pressure, but for here it just seems to be to enforce, yeah, like the pressure or the PCB to spread the pressure more evenly. But it's not a spring or anything, so it doesn't increase the mounting pressure. It's a bit sticky, at least on the points of the screws. It's time to try to remove the PCB. There's a lot of black stuff on this card, I'm not sure why. Here we have the massive heatsink with the huge fin stack. 2 areas for GPU contact, and the rest is for VRMs and also the memory. Everything covered in this black stuff, which is like a thermal putty, but like a black version I didn't see before as well. But let's just move over to the PCB. What an absolute thing of beauty. And it's also quite cool that because it doesn't use any fans, it was so easy to disassemble. So there was no like additional fan cable or anything I had to remove. But yeah, just looking at the layout and the components and everything, What a nice card. And what you might notice is that if you look at this thermal putty again, you can see that it's probably only covering maybe like 50 to 75% of most of the components. So it doesn't cover like these inductors, for example, fully, or also the memory ICs. And you could probably say that this is like bad quality, doesn't cover the components, it will run hot, but that's usually fine. Like for inductors, it could maybe help like 1 degree if you fully cover it, but especially for memory ICs, the hotspot is just like purely in the center, and the chip is also a lot smaller typically than the package itself. So this kind of coverage should be okay for the memory chips and also for the inductors, even though it doesn't look like technically nice. But if you look at this chip, which is probably some kind of like multi-GPU bridge chip, I mean, this could have been covered, even though typically they have a quite low TDP, so the heat output is not that high, but you can see that's not covering everything of the silicon. So, I mean, this could be done better on a technical level. I guess it's fine. It will probably work fine because if you check out reviews and everything, temperatures always looked good in these, but yeah, could probably be improved. Quickly trying to figure out the voltage supply. If I measure to ground from this connector, it's showing about 0.9 to 1 ohm. So that's indicating that this point right here is probably just ground. Whereas measuring the other one on the backside to ground, you can see it's an increasing resistance. It's also a rather high resistance. And probably this should be input 12 volt. I will not clean the card for now because I also want to test if it's possible to detect at least partially the card with a Windows system. I'm not quite sure how much of the MPX connector is needed. Certainly we have a full PCIe X16 connector and we have the power supply next to it. That means that I will just have to solder a cable to the 12 volt power supply and see if this helps and if we can at least get a display signal from it and see if this card is getting detected in a Windows system. And for that, I just don't want to remove like all the thermal stuff for now because I just want to put it back onto the heatsink. For this, I will reuse this 12 volt high power cable, which I already partially abused. So I will just remove 2 of the 12 volt and 2 of the ground wires, add them to the card and then see if this works. First of all, adding some flux. .12 volt and ground are attached. It's not the most beautiful solder connection, but yeah, the PCB takes up a lot of heat, but in the end it's just to test if this works out or not, so it should be fine. I will assemble the card and also assemble a test rig and then we will see what happens. I'm almost done. I attached HDMI, power is there, setup is almost ready to go. The only thing is that you just cannot connect a normal PCIe riser cable to it because there is this part of the PCB right here, which would collide with any normal PCIe riser cable. So I had to remove like the rear part of this connector. Now I will attach this and then we will see if there's any chance to get a display signal. No smoke, also no explosions. So far, nothing though. Not sure if I have to connect the bridge. I will just try it. I tried a few more things, but I wasn't able to get a display signal at post. So I'm just running off the iGPU and see if we can detect something in Device Manager. The thing is, theoretically speaking, it could be that there is some additional voltage missing from the MPX connector. Unfortunately, there is no detailed pinout, so I have no clue what's actually fed to the card. And maybe it could be that there's like 5 volt or 3.3 volt missing somewhere, even though this is also getting delivered over the PCIe slot, at least according to spec, but that's a bit difficult to debug. Let's just check in GPU-C and that looks good. So we have 3 display output devices. The first one is iGPU. I'm not using any driver, so that's why it looks like that, but yeah. Here we have Navi 21, 3840 shaders, so that's also the correct amount of shaders. Doesn't detect any memory or anything like that. It's just running off the basic display output driver. That's why it's also listing the driver date of 2006. It's running off X16 3.0, which is interesting. Let's check for the second GPU. Detected exactly the same way, so it's also running on X16 3.0. Yeah, just the driver is missing. I will see if there is a way to install something. I'll try. I guess the easiest way would be to just install the normal W6800 driver for Windows. Not sure if you can even install that, but I will just try. I didn't expect it to be easy and probably not to be possible. I mean, just running this tells me error 173, like not detecting any AMD GPU. All right. As expected, it's not that easy to install the driver. I did a lot of research. There's also an article on one of the Apple pages that if you want to run this on a Windows platform, then you might have to look for a different driver, and they're linking to an AMD page, and if you download a driver, it just doesn't work. Yeah, I mean, it's not intended to be used like that, so I'm not quite sure if there is a way to do it. If you have an idea how you could do it, then please let me know. I also tried like installing it manually over the device manager and everything. The typical things you could do, I tried, but with no luck. I also had to place a fan in front of the heatsink because it's actually, there's quite some heat coming out of the card, even though it's just pretty much running in idle, but you can see it's running. That's why we can also see it in GPU-C. So, I mean, that's a step further than I originally expected without the MPX connector, but yeah, so far not possible with 3D load. So I will disassemble it again, and then we can finally see the card in a clean state. Here we have the W6800 Duo in the final and clean state. I also removed the cable again just to have some beauty shots of the card. It's a very beautiful card. I also checked up this microchip 52X64. It is a bridge chip for PCIe that features 52 lanes in total, so it can basically combine both of the GPUs to the PCIe X16 slot. Honestly speaking, I'm not quite sure why this MPX slot exists, why this is necessary. There is no pinout or anything, but if you can find something, please let me know. And also if you have an idea how we can probably or theoretically install the driver, that would also be nice. Then we could do a follow-up maybe on this absolutely beautiful piece of tech. I just talked to another YouTuber from Germany. He's called Manuel from Hardware Deals, and he just pointed me towards the bootcamp driver from Apple, and this seems to work. We got one step further at least. After a restart, we can see the Radeon Pro W6800X Duo correctly detected. Also, the memory size is correctly detected. However, you can still see that it's detected with 0 MHz, but 2 GPUs are there. But yeah, and the sensor is also 0, but we made progress, And also in Device Manager, we can see both GPUs correctly detected and also installed. At least there is no error marked on here. In the AMD driver, though, I cannot find anything to, let's say, enable CrossFire. I can see both GPUs, but cannot enable multi-GPU. But I will now try 3D Mark times by, because this should actually allow to render over the third GPU, or like the second GPU, even though I'm currently running the display output over the iGPU of the CPU. In Times by Extreme, we can see the Pro W6800X Duo listed, which I find interesting. It's not a single GPU that's listed. It looks like it's both combined, but we can also see that we have this message, which typically pops up because we are running the display output over iGPU. Let's just find out what happens if we click Run. Interesting. So it just shut down. Not sure why. Maybe something overheated. I have to check. The thing is, because I cleaned the card earlier, all the thermal putty is gone. I'm still running the same kind of setup with the fan in the end. But I'm still just running thermal paste pretty much on both the GPUs and the PCI Express bridge chip, but the rest is pretty much not cooled, which I think should be fine for a simple and quick benchmark run. I will just double check. At least so far, it's still running. Okay, just shut down again. I will have to disassemble the card quickly and check if there is some paste or something missing. I guess it was a little bit less on the PCI Express bridge chip. GPUs looked fine, but we'll just add a ton more paste on there. changed pads and also the thermal paste, but the problem still exists. The last guess I would have is that maybe the PSU is doing OCP, because I'm just attaching, like I'm just running the card basically over 2 wires, which could be a bit too much. So that means I might have to add more wires. I'm adding one more ground and one more 12 volt, and at the same time I also bridged the 12 volt high power adapter to kind of tell the PSU to deliver up to 600 watt. That might also be the trick. And adding the third wire seemed to at least solve the problem partially, because right now I'm still running the 3D Mark Times by Extreme GT1. At least the Times by Extreme GT1 passed, and that should be enough to already get an idea of how much performance we can get out of this thing, and we have 97.21 FPS. Thanks again to Hardware Deals for pointing me towards the correct driver, because that was actually quite nice to see that we can hook up an MPX card that is totally not meant to be plugged in any kind of normal PCIe system or Windows-based system, but you can use it. And the performance is actually quite good. So if you look into the chart with 97.2 FPS, that is beating a 7900 XTX or a 4080. I mean, it makes sense because it's dual 6800 GPUs, but that also means that CrossFire was actually working. Even though there was no option or anything in the driver, it seems to be natively working on a card, which is very impressive. And unfortunately, I couldn't manage to run a full 3D Mark test because the PSU kept shutting off. I might have to solder even more wires to the card. I'm not quite sure how much power it's pulling. Might be that I'm also thermally limited somewhere. That's definitely something for a follow-up video if you want to see it. Might also be interesting to maybe build a water block for this one. But yeah, it's like close to noon right now, and somebody still has to cut this video until tomorrow. So that's it for today. Thanks for tuning in. See you next time. Bye bye.